All right, guys. Well, we're back for another Tailgate Talk edition, but we got a special guest today, Tyler Sipes. We got the name right. So, Tyler was one of our giveaway entries that we did, and had a really cool story on what hunting means to him and why you hunt. So Tyler's from the area, and we said we wanted to get some people on here that were local, and we're glad you could join us, man.
Thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
And we're glad you like Miller Lite.
I do. I love it. Every second of it.
So today, why don't you tell them what we're going to talk about? Tyler picked this topic, and I think it's a cool one to cover, especially right now being at the middle of September.
I came up with the topic. I love talking to people about it. It's one of those things that it's very opinion-based, but at the same time, you have to have facts and reasons of why you're doing it. So we're going to talk about, why we put our stands in certain spots, and then when do you use those stands? So early season, late season, what kind of stand is it? I think it's definitely a hot topic right now, like you guys said in a couple of your videos the last couple of weeks about people just using climbers. You can go anywhere. I'm just like you guys. I have the old clunky rusty tree stand, so I'm not moving around that much. So once they're there, they're there.
Yep.
So I think that's definitely a cool topic to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think too, it obviously changes. We're in central Ohio, so the terrain here is obviously much different than when you guys were just talking earlier before we started recording here, like southern Ohio. So there's not as much ag down that way as there is here. So yeah, what do you guys think? Some of the stands we just hung this time of year, where are you hanging them and why?
I am a big fan of cheaper is better, in my opinion. I don't want to spend, like, there are great stands on the market. We know that. They're lightweight, they don't make noise, but people have been killing deer sitting on the limb of a tree. The tree stand doesn't make your success better. It's where you place it, how you hunt it, and so I'm a big fan of the cheap ones. My favorite tree stands right now are the big game tree stands. You can get them at like Dunham's. They're like $40 on sale. Mm-hmm. And you got to put them together. They're made of solid steel, so they're like 15 pounds, but I mean, you kill deer out of them all the time.
Well, like Tyler said too, if you're hanging a stationary set, it's going to be there anyway. Those are the way to go. Yeah, as far as cheaper, you're not going to want to go buy an $800 stand and have it sit in the same tree for 2 years. You might as well go the cheaper route.
Right. I think we've had this conversation. A stand location isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. I think a lot of people, if you're not moving your stand, put one stand in a spot and then hunt it the whole season. It's not good for the whole season. And I've always said that. You have spots that are good in the early season, good for the rut, good for the late season. And I think too many people, if you're not willing to move your stand, put it in one spot and aren't willing to move it and then wonder why. They see a lot of deer early on, and then after those first 2 weeks of the season, deer's patterns are starting to change, and then they're wondering why they're not seeing deer. So I think that's important to talk about when you talk about your preferred stand locations.
Yeah. Obviously, this time of year, we have a lot of, right behind us here, we have bean fields and everything, so we hang sets sometimes over bean fields. I'm assuming you probably do the same.
Yep.
But those, like Easton just said, first couple weeks of the season, especially if they're taking them off, you got a couple good sits out of them.
I say are great for like 2 weeks, and then you're out of luck.
Yeah, I've been seeing fields that look ready to be picked, which is unreal. But you got some that are still green and then some that are ready to go.
I saw one picked today, actually.
Really?
Yep, already. Really? Yep. So as far as I guess it might be easier to break it down, starting from the beginning of the season and as we move on. So yeah, if you have a green food source of any sorts. A standing cornfield too, though, you can get in there, tuck in tight, as long as the wind's good, and that's going to be great, really throughout the whole season. But I don't know. Go ahead.
Part of our philosophy too is different than the guys who are. This is probably why we haven't made the switch to lightweight, more expensive mobile hunting setups, is because we don't have, it's not like we're taking a trip to South Dakota and have a week to hunt and you gotta be able to be mobile. We're hunting the same plot of land that we've hunted for the last 20 years. Yeah. And so we know the deer for the most part. We make minor adjustments from season to season, but I think that plays into our strategy a lot as to what stands we use, where we hang them, and then how we go about hunting all of those things.
Right, and kind of a general statement too is we like hunting with people, obviously, so a lot of times where we're hanging those stands, yes, we want them to be in good locations, but they also have to be conducive for two people up in a tree, which does limit you a lot of times. But it can also, I think, open your eyes to different situations, and definitely gotten into some sketchy sketchy trees in the past.
You just use the word general, and I think a lot of the stuff we say on here are generalizations. Like, people could argue logically every point we make. What we're saying is generalizations. There's exceptions to everything we say.
Sure.
There are stand locations that are dynamite from the first week to the last. I'm sure somewhere. I sure as heck don't have any of those, but I'm sure they exist. So yeah, what we're talking about is just generalizations and the observations we see in stand locations.
Yeah. For corn, we've not really talked about this that much as a group either, but like standing corn, hunting on the edge of a cornfield, I don't think we have that much experience in a tree line or on the edge of a wood block hunting over standing corn. You probably do.
I got a whole lot of that experience last year. I got a ton of that, and that was, I don't want to say my first year really getting into it, but I had good hunts from probably the first week until maybe the first week in November. Like that whole month of October, I was hunting on the edge of a cornfield and had probably 10 different encounters with nice bucks, either in the woods just off that edge of the cornfield or right on the edge itself. And I was amazed at how many deer were actually just going into the corn or coming out of the corn.
Yep.
I know people say deer live in the corn, but up until last year, I'd never really experienced that firsthand, and I was shocked.
Is it deer live in the corn, or do deer live around the corn, and it just keeps them more centrally located?
Man,
I had an old timer tell me once that he used to hunt with his traditional bow when he was a kid. He would pick corn rows, put the wind in his face, and he would just ease up the corn rows and shoot nice deer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think they live in corn a lot of times. Yeah.
Corn is, I think, a completely different animal when you're talking about a food source. Not only does it last longer than beans in the field, you know, it kept up a lot longer. But even when they cut it, you know, corn drops. So you still have a lot in the dirt before they till it up, which they still wait another month before they till it up. So you have an extra month there. Once they cut the beans, it's over. You know, there's no beans falling off.
Pretty efficient machine picking that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so not only, you know, is it good early season if you have corn, it's good mid-season. It's a great rut resource for your doe. If you can get those doe to go to those cornfields like that, then you know the bucks are going to be falling. So the biggest thing is understanding how to play your resources, and then understand how your deer work with those resources. What do they like better? Do they like the beans better? Do they, you know, fall into there better? Or do they like going to the cornfields better? We only have one cornfield around us within 10 miles right now, and I haven't seen one deer in our bean fields. I mean, they're all over in the corn right now.
Corn's one of those things, don't count out once they take it off. Corn
it's still there. That's another month. Yeah, absolutely.
Even though you may not see the food, there's food that's
still there. Absolutely.
So going back a little to a standing cornfield, have you noticed when you're hunting, because I know I can picture everything Easton's referring to, and I feel like a lot of times the hunts you have, if you're in like the timber, on the edge of the timber with a standing cornfield, the deer almost act more natural. I feel like they feel a sense of security when that corn is there, and I feel like you have a cleaner hunt.
Cover.
Yeah. Right. Have you noticed that too?
I think the biggest thing is, I think they get more wary in the corn than on the edge because they can't see their surroundings. So if they hear something, you know, they want to be able to see it too. What's around me, what's going on. So my biggest thing I've seen is they love to hug the tree line and the cornfield because they can see anywhere they're at. Right. They're still feeding, but they still feel comfortable. They still have that cover, or like you said, the sense of feeling okay there. Once they get in the corn, they can't, you know, they lose one of their senses, and they don't like that. They can hear you, but they're not going to see you. So I think definitely being able to understand that they ride the outside is a way to understand how to put your tree stand too.
Yeah, which works out great for the hunter because that's the only place you're going to get shot.
You're not going to hang a tree stand on a corn stalk.
Deer naturally love edges of any kind, transition areas,
field
fence
to field,
rows, whatever. And that's one of those spots that just creates a perfect storm for a hunter. Is you're right on the edge of the woods, which is where you want to be in a tree, but it also creates a spot where a deer wants to be, which is right next to food, right next to the woods, and a travel corridor that they can just hug and follow. So I think that's just a perfect spot to run into a deer.
Jake, you said you can't hang a stand in corn. I bet the saddle hunters could.
I wouldn't put it past them.
First thing I'm going to do tomorrow is make a meme of someone saddle hunting out of a corn stalk.
Dude, like make him like that big, hanging off the edge of a corn stalk, like the corn stalk.
With the deer right behind him.
Yeah.
Corey's gonna have us after seeing this.
Oh yeah.
My buddy Corey's a big saddle hunter.
Saddle hunters are great, and there's nothing wrong with that. We don't disadvocate against any sort of hunting. We're okay with baiting, we're okay with not baiting, we're okay with trail cameras, we're okay with not trail cameras, we're okay with food plots and not food plots.
It boils down to, is it legal?
Yeah.
For us.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a saddle in my shopping cart waiting for me to buy right now. I just haven't pulled the trigger.
I'm kind of the odd man out too, is like I have a fairly lightweight mobile set. I mean, it's not one of those, lone wolf.
It's either or, stationary or mobile.
Yeah, I mean, that stand has stayed stationary in a tree the past 2 seasons that I've had it. I mean, I've moved it once or twice during season, but this year it's going 100% mobile. I got the sticks to go with it and everything, and then actually just put a whatever the straps on it and a hip belt. Yeah, so it's going to do a lot of working this year.
So let's move to the next phase.
Before we do that, you mentioned something about edge.
Yes.
I think we hear that a lot. Deer are creatures of edge, and you think when we first started exploring that topic, I think defined edges were things that caught our attention, like a tree line in a cornfield, or transition from hardwoods to a thicket, or from pines to a hardwood. And I think those edges aren't as concretely defined for deer as we might like to think that they are. The sign that we just found a couple weeks ago it's literally from hardwoods to you're talking less than a 50 square yard section of little saplings, and that edge is just ripped to shreds with rubs and scrapes and stuff. Mm-hmm. So
those edges don't necessarily stand out to us as much as the
right.
deer.
Right.
So moving on to, I'd be curious to hear October, like mid to late. You hear a lot of people talk about the lull, whether or not that's a real thing. That's up for a whole nother tailgate talk. But where are you focusing then? Like still food source, acorns, scrapes?
So, I mean, we're talking mid-October, we're talking pre-rut. So they're just starting to get into that transition period between the bucks are still, looking for the food, but at the same time, they're starting to put their eyes on the doe. But at the same time, the doe are still eating. They're not changing yet because they're not being pushed hard. So at that time, I'm still hunting. I'm hunting my food plots. I'm hunting my sources of food. Now, if I'm starting to see less and less deer over periods of weeks that they're not eating the sources, then I'm transitioning maybe into the deeper part of the woods where, they're eating the acorns and just coming out of the bedding areas for a couple hours, eating a couple acorns or whatever you have food source in the woods, and then they transition back to the bedding area because they don't want to be pushed by the bucks all the time. They don't want to be running through the woods. So they're going to bedding area, eating, and then going straight back. So you have to play your cards a little bit. Are you going to take a risk, seeing something that, I haven't hunted this spot yet, but I'm thinking this is where they're at, or it's like I've seen a bunch of deer, day in, day out, but they might be transitioning, so am I going to test my luck here too? It's kind of one of those pull the trigger kind of things.
What's going on, especially if you're using cameras. I think over the years, whether we meant to or not, I feel like mid to late October, we sometimes hunt our less aggressive stands. Like the first couple weeks, you still might have that deer that's patternable, and you're getting into some of those sets that are maybe a little bit more aggressive. Yeah. And then you almost, I don't want to say back off, but maybe don't go to those high percentage sets, or maybe you're sitting over a scrape or a food source that you might have a buck pop out into. And then once we get into November, it's kind of switching back to being aggressive.
It's like, do you want to take your shot yet, or do you want to wait for
right,
the November? Are you waiting for the prime time, or do you want to take your early chances when they're not too spooked yet, or running around, or locked down with a doe? That's kind of a preference kind of thing. For sure.
That's one of the reasons why, and the link will be right above my head in this video, but in the tailgate talk where we talked about trail cameras, that's one of the reasons why we advocated for running trail cameras, and if you can, cell cameras in that time of year, because that can tell you whether or not you need to shoot your shot in October.
Right.
Absolutely.
From there, the beloved November. Rut stands. I think you have more room for error during this time frame with your stand placement. You have the ability to call. You have bucks that aren't going to be maybe just down this one trail. They might come down the trail 3 or 4 different times, right? So what are you focusing on November?
November, that's when I'm going to transition. So in the spot that I hunt, we have a couple bedding areas. So, and a lot of times they'll travel bedding area to bedding area, or bedding area to food source. So I'm finding the transition areas, where they're coming out, where they're going in. Like we talked about, the edges or the funnels of where they're coming out of the bedding area, or whether it's going through the woods, if there's thickets on each side and they're going to stay through the hard timber the whole way so they don't have to walk through that kind of stuff, that's where I'm going to look. Because at that time, either your food source, like your beans, are taken off, the corn's down and they're starting to eat it a little less. A lot more hunters are out there, so they're feeling pressured, so they're kind of like trying to stay inside the woods a little more. That's when I'm going to take my deeper shots. I'm going to hunt the edge of the bedding area. I'm going to hunt the oak tree that I know they're coming under every night. Those are when I'm going to take my aggressive. This is all out now, because like you said, this is your room for error. So if you're going to make a mistake, this is when I'm going to make it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're going to hit your shot, this is when you're going to hit it as well.
I like how you refer to that. That's the time to take your shot, tee it up, and swing. Do you have stands that? I know Jake and I talked about this, I think 2 years ago. He shot a nice 8-point out of a stand that we've just historically during November see a lot of bucks and have killed a lot of bucks. Have you noticed that you have a stand set that just year after year during that time produces?
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
For one, we call it the BBD stand, Big Buck Down
nice,
stand,
nice.
for a reason.
I was not there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of those things, kind of just rewinding a little bit, when we were talking about, a mobile set, or if you're talking about a stand that's already there, if you have a stand that's already there, they get comfortable with it. They know it's there year in and year out. It's not moving, so they kind of, it kind of grows into their system, just like it would for us. If I'm hunting a mobile stand and I'm up in the stand and it's not something they've seen before, that's what's going to throw them off. So that's why I really love the stationary stands for that kind of use. And then two, the reason we call it the BBD stand, so we have a very small slither of hard timber. Everything else is all thickets, it's hard to walk through, so on and so forth. And I think they like to take the road that's most traveled. They don't want to have to run through thicket and things like that.
Least resistance.
Yes, exactly. So they come right out of the bedding area. There's a bedding area right behind us, and they walk the hard timber straight to it, and then they come back and they follow the creek line all the way down where no one can see them, scents covered, everything like that. No sounds being made, and it just works out for us. We're sitting right on the creek line, and they walk by it every time. That's where I killed my buck last year, so
awesome.
Works out great.
If we ever hunt together, I'm gonna ask you.
Can we go to the BBD?
Who's sitting in the BBD stand?
Nick's like, hey, it's September 27th. Can we go to the BBD?
It might be a one-seater, but we'll sit together.
There you go. I think it was interesting you brought up that. I never thought of it that way. Right now, it seems like so many guys say the mobile is the way to go because, like, you're in there and they don't expect it. Where you say the stationary, they end up getting used to it. You hear a lot of guys say, they see it, they know it's there, they know to look up, but I like how you bring that up, that maybe they're just like, hey, this isn't out of the ordinary, there's nothing wrong here, this has been here. I like that perspective.
If you remember, a lot of the guys who do mobile hunt, they also say that the first time in a spot is your best opportunity.
I 100% believe.
Absolutely.
That's why I have fallen for the mobile stuff a little bit more. I can think of two right off the top of my head instances where I moved a stand and shot a buck on my first or second sit. And that to me was like a no-brainer. Like, you move the stand and you kill a deer the same time. Just kind of was a little more, I don't know, that's what sold me, I guess.
Yeah.
I think my point in saying that, though, was that for a mobile hunter, let's say they've got a section of timber that's 30 acres. If they're in and out of that spot 5 days a week, 5 days straight, and they're in a different tree every time, deer are going to know. That's a lot more activity up and down a tree with a stand and sticks. They're going to pick up on something. Where you could go into the same spot and hunt a stationary stand 5 times and be a lot less invasive because you're pretty much walking the same path every time.
Yeah, that's why I think access is so important, because you can have a stationary stand, but if they don't know you're getting in it, that's the same as a mobile, essentially. Yeah, interesting.
Well, how many times too do you whether it's a video, I know I like to watch my videos just because I like to see what other people are doing, what's new, what's going on. Is there any tips I can pick up from anybody else that'll help me out in my season? And how many times do you see a mobile stand go up? And a lot of times they do have success, but that deer stares at them for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. And they just, they're putting their head up and down. And they know, they know something's up. And, hopefully your scent's covered and you're holding off well. But a lot of times, they're staring at you for a very long time. They know something's there. They know it's not right. And it's crazy to think that you're 25 feet in the air and they still know you're there.
Yeah. I haven't picked up on that much, but that's why actually we were just talking about the saddle. I think that's one thing that's sweet about a saddle is you can literally
swing
put
around,
the tree between you and the deer the entire time,
Yep.
which is really cool. But Easton, could you pass me another beer?
I can do that. I think I have no idea what I was about to say.
We were
What
on
was I gonna
November,
say?
stationary stands, mobile stands.
Where to put
What
it.
I'm most curious to know is what's the difference between the beginning of November and end of November for you and how you hunt a property? Because that's a big difference for us, we've noticed, on certain pieces of land.
Well, so the big thing for me is once it gets past rut, so you're transitioning back to they're finding their food sources. You know, acorns and things are great. They're an awesome food source, very nutritious for them, but there's only so many acorns at a time. So then that's, you know, you guys also have discussed this is when I start to feed them. And I put my food source out earlier so they get used to it. You know, I don't hunt it because so they can feel comfortable around it and they don't feel like nobody's there, but the stand's there, so they're getting comfortable with that. But it's something that the doer's like, I can get to, it's easy, it's corn or apples, something that, you know, they haven't had since early or late October, early November. So I'll look for transitions like that to my food sources that I have out there, and that's what I'll start to hunt late November compared to early November. I'm taking my shots in the bedding areas and things like that.
So are you hunting right over I'm assuming you're talking about putting out feed, right?
Yeah, whether it's corn, apples, or mineral block.
Okay,
Yeah.
so are you hunting right over that, or do you put it somewhere where you can kind of hope to intercept them on their way to or from it?
Usually what I do is I'll usually put so I have a good range of about 35 to 40 yards is where I feel comfortable, a really good shot for me.
Right.
And I try to get it to where I'll put, you know, sticks down to where they have to come around and get to the food source. So I have an angle of them left or right, you know, they're rear to me, so I have a good shot for one. And two, they can't be faced away from me or anything like that. And then two, I have lanes of fire of ways they could come in. So if they come in from the left, I have lanes to the food source to there, and then I have lanes to the right to the food source. So if they don't come all the way to the food source, then I still at least have a shot before they get there, or if they're just walking past it.
Okay.
One of those kind of things.
Yeah, it makes sense. Jake and I talked a lot about this too, and we always referred, and you hear a lot of people talk about it like, oh, this is a rut farm. Like, we don't hunt it in the early season, it's a rut farm, or oh, this is a great, you know, late season property. And I think a lot of that can be true. Obviously, there's deer there year round, but we've noticed some of our better rut farms are later in November for whatever reason. I don't know if it's that the does there come into to heat later, or if it has to do with the crops, I'm not sure. But where Jake killed that buck I referred to in one of our just traditional good stands, that right before gun season, right? Day before gun season.
The 24th of November.
Yeah, and he was, hard on the doe. Where other places that were great the first week of November and we're hunting those rut funnels whenever you go there late November like we did, where I shot my buck and it's a ghost town. It's just, that's so cool
I've
to
hunted
me.
that before and after the time of year you've typically shot a deer there, and like I've went there before and literally haven't seen a deer yet, and I went there after and also haven't seen a deer. But then I talked to you and you're like, dude, there was bucks everywhere, and I'm like, you're lying to me. Where are you actually hunting?
That week window, which is just so cool, because that window where you see that great rut activity and you hunt those spots like you talking about, for you, hunting your property might be November 1st through the 7th. For me, it might be November 16th through the 20th. It's just, that's so neat to me.
That's why I don't know if anyone's directly given me flack for this, but I don't like the philosophy of the people who say, like, November 7th, you got to be in the woods. That's your best day. It's like, man, if you limit yourself to a single day because of advice given by someone else from a different property or a different state, you're insane.
And then you're sitting here talking about how one spot 15 miles down the road is way better in the late season or later October or November than...
There is no single day in the rut in the month of November that's best for everyone blanket across the Midwest to be out deer hunting. That's different for every single individual.
It's not universal.
It could change for anybody at any time too. You could not see a deer for the first 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you're week 4, first day out, and you're thinking about not hunting anymore or whatever the case may be, and the biggest buck walks in on you out of nowhere. I mean, that's all it takes is 30 seconds. You just have to be there at the right time. Not saying there's a right date, but you have to know your place of hunt. You have to know what your animals are doing, what are your doe doing, and you have to put the pieces together. It's a puzzle, and if but once you get the pieces together, then that's when you're gonna get your deer. But you can't, like you said, you can't base all of your stuff around one factor, whether it's a tree stand, whether it's a food source, whether it's the date. You can't do that. You have to be able to piece everything together and really scout and do all of your homework. You really do.
Which is cool, because that's what we want to try to convey on these tailgate talks is it's all general. It's all, based on your situation and what you prefer and what works best for you and your area. And it is really cool though that it can be so different for different people.
I mean, just the four of us here, we all of the properties that we hunt, the one that I get to hunt behind my house and the one that we hunt 10 miles away are totally different properties, and the deer behave totally differently. You would hunt them in different situations on any given year.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, we did that tailgate talk on our favorite time of year to be in the stand, and guess what? You got 3 different answers.
Yeah.
So that just goes to show that no, there's not. You've experienced different things than what I've observed, and same with you. So yeah, there's not just a one size fits all. This is the day you need to be in the stand. You can count every other day out. As long as you're in there November 7th, you'll get it done. That's not the case.
So we talked a lot about a few different phases now, early season, kind of that mid-October phase, and then now the rut. Is there any time within that area that we just talked about that you try to stay out of the woods? You hear some guys, talk about your ability to be in the woods to kill a deer sometimes is a direct reflection of your ability to stay out of the woods at a certain time.
Sometimes it can hurt you.
Right.
For me personally, for what I hunt, I really don't think it hurts me. I think if you hunt the same areas over and over and over, then yeah, you're going to either start leaving scent or they're going to start catching on, whether you're spooking them moving in or coming out and they start to catch you doing that. I think it's just you have to know when to hunt which stand at what time. And if you can figure that out, then I think you're fine. I mean, they are very smart animals, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, you can be smarter. You just have to, like I said, you have to play your cards right. You have to take your shots. When am I sitting here? I might sit in the timber first week just because, maybe they are transitioning earlier. I don't know. It's one of those things you just have to figure it out for sure.
Absolutely. And if you're a new hunter and you're listening to this, what Tyler's referring to, you're going to have to, wherever you hunt, whether it's Ohio, Alabama, wherever, you're going to have to, Iowa, you're going to have to figure out what that's like for you and your situation. You might figure out a stand and a time of year to hunt, but it might take you 3 years to really know what the deer in that area do. It's not going to be one of those, you listen to this and you go do it and it works.
Well, we've had that before. We've had a property that we've since lost permission on because the owner is leasing that land now, but it took us 2 years of making mistakes and bumping deer on the way in before we finally got to the point where that November morning I was able to kill my biggest buck to date. And
figure it out.
That was the only buck we killed on that piece. It took us like 3 years to figure that out. So it is a lot of trial and error. But that's part of what makes hunting cool, is that there is no one size fits all. It's not read a self-help book and you can figure it out. You got to actually
DIY.
put the time in and do your homework and make mistakes along the way to learn.
Well, and when you do finally figure it out and it works and you find that BBD stand, it's freaking fun.
Yeah, we'd like to think we all have one of those stands that's out there to be discovered.
Yeah.
Like we haven't quite
That's a good
discovered
point.
it yet. But like he was talking about, you got to figure things out. And I talked about this on that podcast I did with Dan Infalt and Clint Campbell on the Truth from Behind the Stand.
We'll link that below.
Yeah. Talking about figuring things out for yourself, I talked a lot about a deer that has yet to be killed, which actually just popped back up on camera last week for the first time.
Nice.
He literally beds, which this is a different type of terrain than where we're at right now. This is southern Ohio hill country, but he beds up on top of this ridge and literally just watches the access. And it's taken us 4 years to figure that out, which is kind of sad on our part. But we think we have the plan for him this year. And we actually figured it out late last season, and we added a 45-minute detour to our access to loop around this giant ridge and come in on the backside, which I guess we'll find out if that's the ticket this year or not. But
Old boy's in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
He smelled back straps.
Yeah.
So we're losing light here. We better start to wrap it up. The last phase, late season, obviously. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say. Food.
Back to the food sources, whether it's something you put in the woods or, if your farmer's gracious enough to leave you some lines of beans or corn or whatever it may be, I'm right back to it. Just like early season, it's all over again.
Yeah. Do you, when you're placing that, I'd be curious to hear we a lot of times when we talked about this, bait later in the year for a few different reasons, but how are you placing that later in the year? There's less cover on the trees. Some of your stationary sets are now exposed. We've noticed that a lot. It's like these stands that are great, you're now sitting duck in a tree basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
How are you placing that? Do you ever put it like on the edge of a field? Are you always putting it in the timber if you're putting corn out?
Both. So I have 2 stands that I put my food source in, and they are both on the inside the woods in the timber. But for those stands, I like to get a tree like a pine tree or something that you'll have cover all year round. And if you can't, you find something that has a lot of limbs that, if they're looking at you, at least you have limbs covering you so they don't have you all the way. Second thing too is at that point, I'm hoping that I have 1 lane shot. That's it. It's a 100% or nothing. That's all it is. And hopefully, the foods is what they're focused on. And as soon as they step in, hopefully I can just get that shot off. That's the big thing. Because like you said, at that time of year, they've survived through gun season. They've survived the slaughter, of course, of the Orange Army.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think they're just weary of anything, of squirrels, of raccoons, of anything. So at that time, it's just, if you can get them focused on the food and you're out of sight, out of mind, I think you have your best shot for sure.
Out of sight, out of mind. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I keep thinking about the giant deer you shot with the huge brow tines over a food source later in the year. That was still gun season, but still it was later in the year, colder weather.
Yeah,
and
December 14th, 15th, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, and he was acting super funny when he was sitting at the food source. Like, he kept popping his head up and looking around. I don't know if there was other deer in the area, but yeah, he was definitely a little more weary of that. Yeah.
Sure.
Which I'd be interested. So, as people who are a little bit different opinion than me, I kind of like the mobile stuff. You maybe not.
I'm mixed. I like both.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So, do you have different sets on every single farm for every single
setup,
phase?
transition?
Right,
Absolutely,
correct.
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Which is basically mobile.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
In a way, and I was thinking when you guys were just talking, I was kind of thinking to myself, in a way, by the time you have 5 different sets for each different spot, you almost could have the money for a decent mobile set. But at the same time, you were talking about how after a stand sits in a spot for so long, they might forget about it, and you wouldn't have that advantage with mobile. Yeah. There's benefits,
pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, disadvantages to everything.
Preference.
So I was wondering if you had just different spots you go to for every different part of the season.
Yeah, to me, I feel safer doing it that way. I feel like if you're thinking like a deer, I feel more comfortable with the old rusty stand that blends in with the trees compared to, like you said, a nice new mobile one.
Right.
Well, there's something about too, like mobile's cool because you could have a different view every night, which to me is fascinating. Like,
or rotate around the tree.
Right.
I mean, that's all it takes.
Every sit, but the stationary too, like I am a super impatient person. I get super frustrated really quick. I like hunting mornings. I like watching the sunrise and the woods coming alive. I don't want to worry about throwing up a stand in the dark. I would get so mad. I'd be sitting down and be fuming mad because something didn't work out right.
You spook a buck that's walking in right at you, and you're in the middle of the tree with nothing up there.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is nice knowing, hey, I got this stand. I can sleep in a little bit. I know exactly where I'm going. All I got to do is climb that tree.
Yep, absolutely.
And we're scared of the dark, so.
That's what I was sitting over here telling him. I was like,
Speak for yourself.
yeah, that's over. You're talking over there about.
Headlamps on.
Only during deer season.
He's not worried about the time it would take to hang the stand. He's terrified of being on the ground.
Because the boogeyman's gonna come get him.
As soon as I'm one ladder section up, I'm good.
I'm like, oh, good. I sprint up the ladder.
It's common knowledge. Bigfoot doesn't mess with turkey hunters, but he does mess with deer hunters.
That's what's weird. During turkey season, I'll walk in at 3 a.m. During deer season, I feel like it's different. Yeah, it's different.
It's like a calming vibe. It's like, I don't know. It is weird. It's a lot different then.
But that pretty much wraps it up, I think. I really enjoyed that one. That's an interesting topic. Obviously, the whole mobile and all the mobile versus stationary is a super trendy topic right now. And I feel like nobody really talks about, from a stationary standpoint, why they're hanging them in advance. You might be hanging those stands in August or June, July for December, which is cool.
Exactly.
That's neat. You got to think ahead and plan from there. So does that wrap it up? You guys got anything else?
No, yeah, that was all his topic that he brought, which was I liked the topic, and it was something different for us.
Fantastic. So if you guys have any other topics that you want to hear us discuss, or if you have any comments related to what we talked about today, if you think we're spot on in our thinking or we're just a bunch of idiots that don't know what we're talking about, let us know. So thank you guys for watching. And again, thanks Tyler for hanging out with us.
Thank
and
you guys for the
talking deer.
opportunity. Seriously, I love that you guys can take your time out of the day, bring somebody else on, hear a different point of view, and hopefully we can all take something from it and have better success in our seasons.
Heck yeah, I'll see you guys in the BBD stand with Tyler later on this year.
There we go.
Cool.
Awesome.
Sure. Yeah, we'll take the corners. And your last name is Sipes, right? Yep. Pronounce that right? Yep. I'm terrible with names.
Sipes.
Yeah,
Sipes.
It could be, dude. You never know these
I've
days.
heard it all.
Aaron.
Sipes. Sipe. Crazy. Is the S silent? No.
There's a D on it.
Yeah. What about the P? Sipes.